So with the crosshairs, is that they're trying to lock in on it? So now they've locked in on it, right?
Yeah, they weren't able to gain a lock in their air-to-air mode, so they actually had to degrade down to an air-to-surface mode, kind of a manual locking mode, and that's that box that you see.
What is the difference? Like,
the air-to-air mode should essentially be looking exactly where the radar is dropping them off and should automatically lock on it. But in the method that you're seeing here, the pilot's manually slewing the sensor. This is kind of like a last-ditch effort to get it. And he's like restarting it, and that's why the box keeps getting bigger, and it's getting smaller, it's not capturing it.
what would be the difficulty? Like, why is it difficult to lock on?
We don't know. One theory is that it's because it's relatively close to the ground, and there's a lot of background, right, to confuse the sensor. But it's
How far off the ocean is this supposed to be?
It's somewhere around 10,000 feet or so. So it's really not that close. So it's really not a great explanation. But, yeah, you can see him try it there.
Now, what do they estimate the size of this thing to be?
I don't know if anyone has estimated a size, to be honest. It's hard, from the pilot's perspective, they're not going to be able to make a real-time assessment of the size.
Because how far above this thing are they?
Well, they're about 5 miles away or so.
5 miles.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you see the range 3.4 right there. That range is coming strictly from the AT FLIR sensor itself. It's not a very reliable indicator of the range. That's what the radar is for. So although it says about 3.5, 4.4, and then ticks down, it's probably a little bit further away.
What does that
than
stand for? RNG?
Range.
So the speed is that on there anywhere of how fast this thing's going?
So you have 170 V sub C right below the range, and that's indicating our relative velocity.
And that's miles per hour or kilometers?
It should be knots, so it's probably like 180, 190 miles per hour.
No heat signature.
Well, there is a heat differential anyway. So right now we're in white hot. So objects that are white are hotter objects than the background.
I've used infrared binoculars before.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. You can see like raccoons and shit.
So that's showing us that it's cooler than the surrounding environment for whatever reason.
Which is very bizarre for something that's moving 170 whatever miles an hour.
Yeah. And it's just to be clear, the 170 doesn't represent its like raw speed.
So this is the gimbal video, which is different.
Yep.
And this one, does it show the speed of this?
No, I don't.
And this is the one that rotates.
Yes.
And when we're looking at this signature, when we're looking at the does that represent something that's cooler than the outside area or hotter? Like, what does that represent?
So this one's black hot. So this is showing us that it's hotter than the surrounding areas right now.
And would this be similar to what you would see if you saw a jet that was flying?
No. I mean, we've seen thousands of aircraft like that.
But I mean, in terms of the signature that it gives off with the temperature, or would you be able to see a visible means of propulsion that would be accentuated?
Yeah, you would see the exhaust coming out of the back. You'd be able to see the skin of the aircraft itself. So the sensor is not great, but it's good enough where you can break out some pretty good detail on a jet. I mean, it looks like a jet.
Right. Well, this definitely doesn't look like a jet. It kind of looks like a flying saucer. And then it turns sideways, which is really weird. Is there anything on that shows the speed?
On the bottom left, you see 242 knots. That's how fast the aircraft that is recording it is going. The pilots do talk about how it's going 120 knots against the wind. And in my recollection, it was going at a relatively slow speed for a fighter aircraft, around 100 knots or so at those speeds, from looking at the radar data itself.
So as far as you know, we don't have anything that moves like that.
No.
And we don't have anything that gives off a signature like that.
No. No.
And were they able to figure out where this is going or keep an eye on it? Or do we have sensors that can detect this for any length of time?
You would assume that the sensors on the ships themselves, if they were looking there, would be able to detect these objects. But we're not really linked into those people that are doing that on the boat. The pilots essentially took this upon themselves to go investigate this, and they reported to Intel when they came back. And that's where I saw the tapes. Whether like the air traffic management guys on the boat themselves then took it upon themselves to go try to detect these objects, I don't have that information. I was never in that information stream, but presumably they would.
Is there a capability where, so if a fighter jet locks in on something like that, is there an additional source of some sort of satellite that they can team into or tune into, where they can give them the coordinates and say, hey, this is at this exact coordinate and it's moving at this speed? Can you guys lock into that?
No, not within the jet itself. We can share the data amongst jets. So if you were flying out there and the aircraft that recorded that video was getting that on the radar, that information would be getting sent to other jets in the area. There was a large training mission going on, and I'm not aware of anyone that was paying attention to those contacts that were, say, 50 miles away from where they were doing this fight. But it shouldn't have been just self-contained into the aircraft itself. And additionally, that information should have also been received by the ship itself, right? They should have access to that same information that's being shared.
Right, that's what I was getting to. Like, can the ship itself then lock in the coordinates with the satellite, or do we have that kind of capability?
We don't, as pilots, we don't really get into the satellite game, if you will. That's kind of like a different level than how we operate. So it's feasible that a ship might call in other national assets to investigate, but we operate as like a self-contained expeditionary group, so I don't know if that's part of their protocol.
So they wouldn't even refer to you or discuss it with you.
Yeah.
Did anybody discuss any of these things with you? Like when you're talking about the safety hazard, you've got this clear circle with a black square inside of it, and they're flying in this very unusual way. When you described it to people, what's the feedback?
Honestly, most people just kind of looked off into space.
Really?
Yeah, like, that's interesting.
That's fucking weird.
Yeah.
Did they give you the impression that this is not surprising?
Only once. So when we had the gimbal captured, and just real quick, the gimbal and the GoFast happened within minutes of each other.
Oh.
The gimbal...
Two different things, but they happen within minutes of each other.
Yeah, the GoFast, there was multiple objects in a line formation called line abreast.
Right. How
flying
many?
Side by side. 4. They're about a mile apart, flying in formation, doing what they're doing. The pilots were looking at that, had a hard time locking it, and then they kind of brought their attention up to this other object that's basically co-altitude with them, and that's the gimbal video. And behind the gimbal, there was what they refer to as a fleet of objects, about 4 to 6 objects that were flying in a formation, like a tight formation, all within about a mile and a half of each other, in a like a V formation.